Well, folks, President Trump just continues to dominate the midterm battlefield. And you can see proof of it last night, where Abdul El-Sayed won the Michigan Democratic Senate primary by 14,893 votes. And President Trump is already turning that primary into a fight for this November Senate election. Now, that is the immediate story, okay? But it's not the whole story. The bigger story here is what keeps happening across the country. The activist left keeps winning these Democratic primaries, but every victory widens the fight between the party's establishment and the people who now control the nomination process. Now, I don't want to limit this just to Michigan, okay? That just proves the entry to this point. What I want to do is update you on the discussion I started a few weeks back, where I said that President Trump is controlling this battlefield. But to understand this update, you have to separate two simple questions. Number one, who is taking over this party, the Democratic Party? Second, who's going to win the November elections? Now, here's what's happening. The socialist wing on the far left is unseating Democratic incumbents in primaries across the country. But many of these incumbents sit in safe Democratic seats. So these Democrats are not in danger of losing their seats in the in the general election this November. So those primary victories, they don't really change the election map. What they do is they change who has power inside of the Democratic Party. The races that are really going to decide the map are the Senate races or the governor races, and the targeted districts where Republicans actually have a chance to flip a congressional seat. But that is where far-left nominees have to face a much larger and more middle-of-the-road electorate. And President Trump knows the difference between these things. And he's using the first question as a wedge, because even a safe seat primary victory, well, that forces Democratic leadership to answer, are you with this nominee? Are you part of this far-left movement? Are you against the nominee? Then President Trump looks for the races where that internal fight can actually cost the Democrats a seat. He perpetuates the problem. Now, Abdul El-Sayed, he defeated Haley Stevens by less than 1 percentage point. The reported margin was 14,893 votes. It was a primary with more than 1.5 million ballots that were cast. That gives President Trump something very specific to work with, because it's not an abstract argument about whether the Democrats are moving left. This is a named candidate in a statewide Senate race in a general election on November 3rd. President Trump immediately treated the Michigan result as a November fight. He didn't treat it like a local primary that's going to disappear from the news cycle tomorrow. And that's the actual pattern. Again, Trump sees the primary result. He identifies what it says about the opposition, and he immediately starts defining the general election contrast before Democrats have the time to finish congratulating themselves. But here's the distinction that we have to make. These primary winners are not automatically a perfect picture of the entire voter base. Primary voters are motivated. They are the people who spend time learning the candidates, arguing about them, and showing up when turnout is much smaller than it will be in the general. So when the activist left wins a primary, that tells you it had the stronger organization and the stronger drive to vote in that specific race. But it does not mean that the broader Democratic electorate wants the same far-left agenda. And that difference is exactly where President Trump is getting his leverage. You look at New York. Progressive-backed candidates use the Democratic primary process to win some important contest and push the party further towards the activist left. Zohran Mamdani, right? Now, that may not flip a Republican-held seat, but it raises the basic questions that Democrats have to answer. Who's controlling the party? Now, the establishment wants to win back moderate voters, and the activist coalition, well, they believe the party has not gone far enough. Well, look at Colorado, too, where, was it Millet Quiros defeated longtime Democratic incumbent Diane DeJette in the primary? That doesn't automatically mean the districts are changing hands in November, but it does show that the people controlling the Democratic primaries are not the establishment. That power structure is changing. The old assumption that the Democratic establishment controls the nomination process, that no longer exists. And the more often that assumption breaks, the more difficult it becomes for the Democrats and their leadership to tell voters that the activist wing is only a small faction that they can keep under control. And President Trump understands this and is leveraging the hell out of it. Now, if you look in Missouri, you have Wesley Bell, who defeated Cori Bush. In Virginia, establishment-backed candidates won some important Democratic nominations. Now, these races are important because they keep us honest. This isn't a claim that the far left is going to win every primary. It's not a claim that every primary victory changes the congressional map. The claim is that the Democratic Party is in a fight, a real fight internally, and they're battling over its direction. Safe seat victories are giving President Trump a wedge against the establishment. Because at the end of the day, they are the important part of the party because they control the money flow for the general. They have the experience, the wisdom that these far lefters don't have. They just have energy. Now, statewide and targeted race victories are going to be where the broader electorate is going to decide whether the Democrats follow one direction or the other. More importantly, going to show whether these new directions can actually win or whether the Democrats just lose outright. And that's why this is creating so much panic. Okay, the Democratic establishment is livid about this. They're losing control of the nomination process, and they don't have a unified platform that can hold the party together. Not from a safe Democratic district, at least all the way up to the statewide Senate or governor's race. They're being forced to fight over issues that have broad-based support outside of the activist primary electorate. And this is where the polling is interesting. Now, you look at the recent viral videos from Harry Enton, who's the CNN analyst. He doesn't show a simple Democratic collapse, but he shows some panic. Democrats can still lead the generic congressional ballot at this point. That doesn't matter. I mean, one reported reading put Democrats at 47 and Republicans at 39. But regardless, the argument here can't honestly be that Democrats have no chance in the midterms, because they do. The problem is that a generic ballot lead is not the same thing as having candidates, and especially candidates that voters actually want to defend in these individual races. They can lead on a national question while still nominating candidates who are going to make their own party nervous in a statewide general. And that nervousness, in turn, will fracture the Democratic power structure and how they formally run these general elections. The marketing, the get out, all that stuff. That's all brand new for these folks. So every time the activist left wins another nomination, the establishment has to come to one of two things. They can defend them and accept the policy baggage, or it can distance itself from them and maybe admit that its own primary voters chose somebody that the party doesn't really want to stand behind. But regardless, President Trump gets an immediate contrast that he is manipulating. But the contrast matters, okay? And it matters most when the nominee is running before a broader electorate, not when the Democratic candidate is sitting in some safe seat. Now, here is where the primary argument is going to run into the kitchen table test. Does the ongoing Democratic divide actually represent what the broader Democratic base wants? Because it doesn't show that, okay? The people winning these primaries just simply have stronger drive to get out to vote. But again, when you move away from the activist politics and ask people about concrete issues, the picture changes. And you can just look at the Save America Act for evidence. Hey, that's the bill that President Trump has been pushing Congress to pass. Polling shows that 71% of registered voters supported the bill. Okay. That includes 50% of Democrats. That was a 50-50. They polled 50% of the polling was Democrats, 50% was Republicans, and combined 71% approved. In that same poll, they found 75% supported requiring proof of citizenship. 81% supported voter ID. That is broad public support. And Democratic leadership has attacked it. They call it suppression. Okay. And it's not clear whether the activist group cares about that, but you would think that they do. But frankly, it's hard to tell what every faction in the Democratic Party supports because the primary fights are being driven by slogans, personalities, and turnout. But here's what we know. We know that the broader voter base is not automatically demanding the most extreme positions available. We know that. So the question becomes whether the Democratic leaders are going to follow voters on an issue that has bipartisan support, or whether they're going to follow the activists who are most effective at taking over. That's the kitchen table difference between winning a safe primary and going on to win a statewide general. I think the more divided Democrats become, the easier it is going to be for President Trump to continue to poll and win these Senate seats in order to keep advancing the Trump and America First agenda. That's why this divide in the Democratic Party is so politically useful for him. He knows a safe seat primary victory may not change the map, but he's willing to use it as a wedge because it forces the Democratic establishment to pick a side. And some of what Trump is doing, it must be perpetuating that divide. But in this case, it's not a weakness in the strategy. It's a pressure point on the Democratic establishment. And they're being forced into a decision that they don't want to make, not publicly. So if Democratic leaders, if they defend these far leftists, well, Trump has the opportunity to set a contrast. If they run away from them, well, we've pushed the division even further. If the party tries to hide the nominee's record, President Trump can put that record in front of voters himself. He has the platform. This is how this becomes a November problem for Democrats and a absolute masterclass of a strategy for the president when voters go to the broader electorate. So, look, from here, I'm watching four things. I'm watching, the rest of the primary victories and where they happen. Are they in safe Democratic seats, or are they ones where statewide or genuinely targeted races occur? I'm not confusing the ideological movement with a safe seat flip or an all-out seat flip. Second, I'm watching what Democrat leaders are doing after each victory. Are they embracing the nominee? Are they distancing themselves, or are they pretending that the race never happened? And third, I'm watching the kitchen table polling. If voters continue to support proof of citizenship, voter ID, lower costs, public safety, and all of the other broadly popular positions that President Trump has, then the party's activist primary politics are going to be out of step with the people that they're going to need in November. And fourth, I'm always watching President Trump. Okay. He's not going to wait for Democrats to define these candidates. He's going to take the statewide nominee or the targeted district nominee with the most controversial record. He's going to attach that record to the National Democratic Party, and he's going to make them answer for it. That's how he does business. So Michigan was the trigger, but the real story is national. We're watching Democrats fight over who controls the party. And President Trump is driving that wedge. Keep your eyes on the ball. And boy, I hope you political class folks, I don't know if you're watching or not. There's so many people that I know watch what I do. But if you are, guys putting on a masterclass right now. And you guys should be paying attention.